My name is Allison Grant. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in a quiet neighborhood just outside Savannah, Georgia. I'm not the kind of person who ever thought my life would be laid bare for strangers to hear. I kept my private moments close. I thought love was something you built brick by brick, patient, steady, with someone who promised they'd stand beside you through anything. For almost a decade, I believed I'd found that person. His name was Daniel. When we met, I wasn't looking for love. I was just living. But somehow, Daniel had a way of making the ordinary feel like it was part of some bigger, beautiful plan. We met through mutual friends, and I still remember the first night clearly, not because of fireworks or grand gestures, but because of how easy it felt. Talking to him was like breathing. We fell into each other's lives naturally. The first year, there was that intoxicating rush, staying up until dawn talking about everything and nothing, taking drives with no destination, sharing secrets that I'd never said out loud before. Over time, the relationship matured. It became comfortable, familiar, the kind of connection people dream of having. We built traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, movie nights where we always argued about what to watch, road trips with playlists that became ours. But looking back now, I realize there were moments, little cracks in the walls I chose not to see. Times when he would pull away ever so slightly, his attention somewhere else, his mind occupied with something he wouldn't share. I told myself it was work stress, that we all have our off days, that loving someone meant trusting them even when they seemed distant. Then, she appeared. Not all at once, no. She came quietly, as if she'd always been there, just at the edges of my life. I didn't even know her name at first, but I knew her smile. I knew the shift in his voice when he spoke about her. And I knew, though I couldn't admit it then, that something was already changing between us. It started with subtle things: a text that made him excuse himself from the room, a weekend trip he swore was for work, but the details didn't quite line up, late nights where his explanations sounded practiced, as though he'd rehearsed them in the car before walking through the door. I tried to push away the unease. This isn't just my story. It's the story of anyone who's ever been blindsided by someone they trusted with everything. And I'm telling it here, for Unfaithful Chronicles, because I know there are others who've lived this same heartbreak. I want you to hear every detail, every moment I ignored the truth, every sign I wish I had confronted sooner. And before this is over, you might find yourself questioning the person sleeping next to you. Because I thought I knew how this would end, but I was wrong. I still remember the day I met Daniel like it's frozen in time. It was one of those humid Georgia afternoons where the air clings to your skin, and all I wanted was an iced coffee and a few quiet minutes to myself. I ducked into this little cafe that doubled as a used bookstore, the kind of place where the furniture didn't match, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. I wasn't paying attention. My hands were full, coffee in one, my bag in the other, and as I rounded the corner toward the register, I collided with someone. My coffee tipped just enough to send a few drops onto the open book he was holding. I gasped, apologizing over and over, while he just stood there, looking more amused than annoyed. "Guess this book needed a little extra character," he said, flashing this crooked smile that made my face warm. I noticed his eyes before anything else, deep brown, the kind you feel rather than just see. That was Daniel. We ended up talking right there in the cafe for nearly an hour. He asked questions that didn't feel like small talk, and he actually listened to the answers. Before I left, he scribbled his number on the back of my receipt. I remember tucking it into my wallet, telling myself it was just a nice moment, nothing more. But deep down, I knew I'd call him. Our first date was 2 nights later. We sat at a small table by the window in a family-run Italian place. We laughed so much that night the waiter came by twice to make sure everything was okay. It felt easy, effortless. From there, we became almost inseparable. Sunday mornings were pancakes in my tiny kitchen, where he'd hum the same 3 songs over and over while flipping them. Wednesday nights became trivia night at the bar down the street, where we'd team up and lose spectacularly every single week. On lazy evenings, we'd curl up on the couch, the glow of the TV washing over us while he absent-mindedly traced circles on my arm. We built a rhythm, the kind that feels solid, safe, the kind you think will last. There were weekend road trips where we'd pull off at random exits just to see what was there. A little town with a diner that served pie so sweet it made your teeth ache. A roadside market where he bought me a cheap silver ring. Life has a way of changing quietly at first. So quietly that you don't notice it's happening until you look back and realize the ground had been shifting under your feet the whole time. Back then, I didn't know it. I didn't feel it. All I saw was a man I loved, a life we were building together, and a future I thought was certain. But I can see it now. The little moments that didn't quite fit. The times when his phone would light up and he'd smile faintly before turning it face down. The last-minute plans that didn't include me. Things I brushed off without question. Because why wouldn't I trust him? I didn't know it yet, but something was already changing. And soon, it wouldn't just change us. It would break us. It started with a name I almost didn't remember. We were sitting at the kitchen table one Thursday night, eating takeout after he'd gotten home late from work. He was telling me about a new project his team was working on, the usual mix of office politics and deadlines, when he mentioned someone named Emily. "She's new," he said casually, between bites of lo mein. "Pretty sharp, actually. She's been helping me get the numbers together." I nodded, barely paying attention. I'd heard plenty of names over the years, and I didn't think twice about this one. People came and went in his line of work. She was just another coworker. Over the next few weeks, her name came up again here and there, always in passing, always harmless. Emily found that spreadsheet I thought was gone. Emily covered for me in the meeting today. I never felt a reason to question it. If anything, I was glad he seemed to have a good team around him. The first time I met her was at a friend's barbecue. She was there with a small group from Daniel's office. We shook hands, exchanged polite smiles. She was warm, friendly, and I could see why people liked her. She laughed easily, had this energy about her that made her hard to ignore. I remember thinking, "Oh, she's nice." But there was something else, something I didn't fully register in the moment. The way Daniel's eyes seemed to follow her, even in a crowded yard full of people. It was subtle, but it was there. After that day, I started noticing changes I didn't want to admit were real. Daniel's phone would light up later at night than it used to. At first, it was work messages, or so he said. Then it became more frequent, little bursts of conversation that made him smirk to himself before locking the screen. Plans started falling through. We'd have dinner reservations, but he'd call an hour before saying something had come up. "Work stuff, I'll make it up to you." Sometimes I'd hear the hum of voices in the background, not an office, not his car, and when I asked, he'd give vague answers that left me feeling foolish for pressing. And then came the distance. Not physical at first. He was still there beside me on the couch, still kissing me goodnight. But emotionally, it felt like he was slipping somewhere I couldn't reach. Conversation, something in my chest tightened. I told myself not to be ridiculous, not to be that person, jealous, insecure, making something out of nothing. But my gut was screaming at me, even as I smiled and nodded through conversations with other people. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling long after he'd fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, peaceful. Mine wasn't. I didn't know exactly what was happening yet, but I knew this much. Something had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. It didn't happen overnight. The change came in fragments, like someone replacing pieces of a puzzle one by one, until the picture was no longer the same. It started with comparisons, small at first, almost disguised as compliments. One evening, As we were getting ready to meet friends for dinner, he glanced at my dress and said, "Emily has that same color blouse. It really suits her too." He smiled as if it was nothing, but the words landed heavier than they should have. Then it was other things. "Emily's really into hiking. We should try it sometime." Or, "Emily's read that book you were talking about. She loved it." Each mention seemed innocent, yet it built this quiet unease inside me. I wasn't just sharing my life with Daniel anymore. I was sharing space in his mind with her. The communication between us began to shrink. Conversations that once stretched into the early hours now ended with a distracted, "I'm tired, let's talk later." When I'd ask about his day, I'd get a handful of words in return, followed by the glow of his phone screen lighting up his face. His excuses became a steady rhythm. Late meeting, last-minute work drinks, traffic was bad. I stopped believing them, but I didn't stop hearing them. The proof came on a rainy Thursday night. He was in the shower, and his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it, but something in me, I don't know if it was instinct or desperation, but I picked it up. The first thing I saw was a notification, a message preview that read, "I can't stop thinking about last night." I felt my stomach drop so fast it made me dizzy. I unlocked the phone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type the code, and there it was, a thread of messages, some short, some long, teasing words, inside jokes I didn't understand, and one photo of them together at a bar I'd never been to, taken just 2 nights before. It didn't end there. Later, scrolling through social media, I saw it, a tagged photo of him and Emily at a work event. His arm was around her waist. The caption from one of her friends read, "These two," with a winking emoji. My chest tightened so sharply, it felt like my ribs might splinter. That night, I confronted him. I waited until he came in. I told myself I needed answers. Real ones. Not the half-truths and deflections I'd been fed for weeks. So I called him. My voice was calm, almost too calm, when I asked if we could meet somewhere to talk. He suggested a quiet cafe on the edge of town, a place we'd been to before, though not recently. I remember sitting there before he arrived, staring at the chipped mug in front of me, the smell of burnt coffee in the air, my hands pressed tightly around the cup just to stop them from shaking. When he walked in, my heart did that foolish thing it always did. It leapt before it remembered. He looked the same, familiar, but there was something in his eyes, a guardedness, like he'd already decided how this conversation would end. We talked at first about small things. I don't even remember what. The weather, his schedule, meaningless words to fill the space between us. And then I asked him. No build-up, no gentle lead-in, just, "Daniel, are you in love with her?" He froze. His jaw tightened just slightly. I watched his gaze shift to the table, to his hands, anywhere but my face. For a moment, I thought he might lie again, that he might throw another wall between us. But then he took a breath, and he said it. "I think I'm better with her." The words landed like a blow to the chest. It wasn't anger I felt first. It was something worse, an emptiness so sudden, so complete, that it felt like the air had been pulled out of my lungs. I sat there, staring at him, and the sounds of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the low hum of conversation, faded until all I could hear was the echo of his voice. I didn't cry right away. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. My body felt still, like even movement might shatter me into pieces I'd never put back together. One tear slipped down my cheek, quiet and unannounced, landing on the back of my hand. He kept talking, something about how it wasn't my fault, how we'd just grown apart, how he hadn't meant for this to happen. But the words were already distant, like they were coming from underwater. The only thing I could focus on was the realization that I wasn't the person he wanted anymore. In the weeks that followed, I learned something I hadn't wanted to face. that sometimes love doesn't disappear in a storm of arguments or the wreckage of betrayal laid bare. Sometimes it slips away quietly, not because of hate, but because someone else caught their eye, and they didn't look back. At first, I existed in fragments. My days were mechanical. I'd go to work, smile when I needed to, answer questions with automatic words, then come home to an apartment that felt too quiet. His absence wasn't just in the empty side of the bed. It was in the coffee mugs that stayed clean, the coat hook that stayed empty, the playlists that felt wrong without him beside me. But the human heart has a way of mending in unexpected ways. Slowly, I began to fill the spaces he left behind. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. My weekends weren't spent waiting for his calls or rearranging my plans. They were mine to fill. I took long walks through the park with a podcast in my ears, cooked meals I liked without wondering if he'd approve, and even signed up for a photography class. There were moments when the ache returned, sudden and sharp, passing by the cafe where we first met, hearing a song that had been ours, seeing a car that looked like his drive by. But each time, the pain was a little less. It didn't vanish, but it stopped defining me. One rainy afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window with a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the world move on outside. I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not his apology, not his return, not the what if that had haunted me for months. I had stopped measuring my life against the shadow he left behind. He chose her over me, and now I'm choosing me over him. Because the truth is, losing him wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a different one where I'm not defined by who loves me, but by how I choose to love myself. And if you've ever sat where I sat, wondering how you'll survive the kind of heartbreak that takes your breath away, you will. You'll survive, and you'll rise. This is just one story in Unfaithful Chronicles, but it won't be the last. So if you want to hear the next one,